Welcome to SOLIDWORKS Live, everyone. Hey, if it is your first time here, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the little notification bell to catch up with all of our new content, especially our live streams. And regardless of whether you're new, give us a thumbs up here. And here can mean LinkedIn, it can mean YouTube, it can mean Instagram, wherever you're watching. On this video, if you appreciate the content that we make here at SOLIDWORKS, we have live streams that give you the chance, really all of us, the chance to get together with other community members as we learn together about things like new software releases, ways of 3D modeling, getting parts made, and much, much more. And a big part of this particular series, which is called SOLIDWORKS Live, is bringing you the latest and greatest when it comes to SOLIDWORKS and by extension, 3D Experience Works. And in this episode, we're doing just that by bringing you the latest and greatest trends as told to us by the best and brightest in our community, the SOLIDWORKS Champions. So if you're unfamiliar, the SOLIDWORKS Champions program is home to hundreds, almost 1,000 at this point, hundreds of users from around the world, over 50 countries, who go above and beyond in sharing their passion and expertise for all things SOLIDWORKS. And these are, as you can imagine, these are heavily certified and involved users, mostly from industry, who love sharing their knowledge and insights. So you can imagine when I asked a portion of these champions to share their feelings and experiences on the topic of CAD file management and product development today, you just know they jumped at the chance. So during this episode, you'll get champion insights on topics like using PDM and PLM systems, change management practices, and much, much more. And it'll be, the style of this episode will be more of a roundtable discussion of sorts that will be driven by these insights that we got from champions. And I like to say it'll be co-hosted and co-guested by myself, Steve Fick, and Lisa Costa. And all three of us work here at SOLIDWORKS on our data governance solutions. And all three of us had careers prior to SOLIDWORKS where we worked on industry projects and with other SOLIDWORKS customers in a variety of roles to solve their product development and data management challenges. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome on Lisa Costa. Lisa, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's happy to be here.
Happy to have you as always. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Oh yeah, so I mean, like most of us, I'm a CAD aficionado, right? Back in the 80s, I actually wrote my own CAD system in college. That was
Wow.
Back before there was SOLIDWORKS existed. But then I've been in the SOLIDWORKS channel, but I've worked in industry and I've worked with CAD tools, but I found from a career standpoint, it's not just about the CAD files, it's about product data, right? It's about managing not just the files, but all of the processes and things around that. And that's really what I've been doing here at SOLIDWORKS for the past 3 years with the 3D Experience platform, is bringing all that to bear on our SOLIDWORKS users and more.
Awesome. And when I said wow, by the way, I meant wow at the part that you wrote the CAD system, not when you referenced the 80s. By the way, to be serious for just a second, we have Steve, we have Lisa, we have myself. I'm very excited to talk to you guys today, but we also have all of you in the chat. So if you're on YouTube, if you're on LinkedIn, be sure to ask questions. This is live. Ask questions, make comments. We have our SOLIDWORKS social team, our wonderful social team here monitoring the chat for all those. So be sure to enter those in, and I'll check in every now and then just to see what you're thinking. So Lisa, thanks again for joining us. And we also have Steve Fick here. Steve, how's it going?
I'm great, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And just for those of us, I know you've been on live very recently, but for those of us who are less familiar with you, tell us a little bit about what your background's like.
Sure. Yeah. So I did machine design for a number of years utilizing SOLIDWORKS, and then I ended up at a reseller and got pretty heavily involved with the data management side of things. Turned out that I really like process, and a little weird that way, but I really like understanding customers' processes, what they do, and then how we could help them take data management solutions and improve upon them. And so yeah, so I've been at this for close to probably 18 years now. So
wow. So many, between the three of us, many years of experience. And it's interesting you say that. I think those of us who are really, really into, like I mentioned, data governance and CAD file management, I mean, yeah, we are a little bit particular. But I think a large part, and we'll talk about this later, a large part of what we do is we make it easier for designers to keep designing. And when you look at champion-driven designs, again, a large part of this episode is we've surveyed champions and we're taking their insights and telling you some of the trends that have come out of those. The first trend, I think, should be no surprise to anyone watching. You think you're a champion, you've made outstanding product designs, and now you not only want to keep them safe, but understand how to find them, right? The right version or the right revision at the right time. So let's talk about this first trend, shall we, Steve?
Yeah, let's do it. So I think one of the first things that we'll lead out of the gates with, as you said, is this idea of intelligent revision control. So maybe to start, maybe we'll talk a little bit about what's unintelligent.
First word, let's analyze that.
Right. Let's start there. So, I think one of the things that I've seen over the years is that customers do a lot of really interesting things to manage revisions, right? There's a lot of complexity in the SOLIDWORKS relationships. And so, when you look at, we've seen a lot of customers add, suffixes to file names, right? It's _A, _B, _C, or, they'll try to, they'll put notes on a drawing, right, that indicate, okay, well, this is what we changed. It's all good. Or I've seen a combination of both added into what I've kind of affectionately coined the engineering shell game, where you've got 3 folders and you're moving files from the in-work folder to the frozen folder to the released and then back, and it's just a lot of work going on, just simply managing revisions, and what makes this even more complicated is the fact that, this is all happening inside of a Windows folder environment, and it's not the Windows was meant to manage files, but not necessarily the all the relationships associated in the engineering processes.
Sure.
What we do. And so this was kind of an interesting, one of our first survey questions was just simply, is it effective? Do you find it effective to manage your files and work with others in a Windows environment? And, almost 70% of the people rated it a 3-star or less experience. Right?
We were joking, we were saying, and maybe for our SOLIDWORKS social team, this would actually be a pretty good poll, just to make sure you're all awake. Would you like to go to a 3-star restaurant? If you saw a 3-star Google reviewed restaurant, would that be your first choice?
Yeah, well, I'll save my thoughts. Do the poll. But I think this is a really it's really quite telling, right? I mean, Windows is what we have, it's what we've gotten used to, but the reality, or maybe the good news, is there's actually some ways to do this better. One of which is with PDM Professional. So if we take a look at this video, I think for those of you who used it, have seen that many of you, even if you don't use PDM Pro, are at least familiar with it. But it's this idea that I can, right within inside of SOLIDWORKS, have access to all my revisions. If something changes, it's giving me visual feedback that I need to load the new revision, and it's taking care of everything in the background, if you will, right? So it's just helping me stay focused on the design. And PDM Pro is phenomenal. It's very near and dear to my heart. I've got a lot of my career obviously invested in it. And for companies that need high levels of customization for business, or they need their servers in-house for regulatory requirements or things like that, it's hands down the best for managing SOLIDWORKS data. But what's also nice, though, is that we have a new group of customers who are really quite interested in cloud infrastructure. And so with the 3D experience, very quick to get up and running and to be managing my references in with the platform, right? So if we take a look at this and we look at how we're managing revisions, we've got full control over the relationships. Sometimes you hear us call it the digital thread, the where used, and what's going to have a knock-on effect if I make a change. And simple right mouse button click, I can say bump the revision, add a comment, and then just simply go ahead and revise. And in the same way, it's managing the revisions for me in the background and those relationships. So some nice options when it comes to being able to more effectively control the revisions that you're there right?
Yeah, and I think the three of us, we've talked about this before. There isn't really a wrong option. I like how you put it. It's more kind of befitting your circumstance and what you need to do in your scenario. Like you said, PDM Professional, lots of our customers, use that today, especially our champions. We did a bit of a survey on that. I think there was something around 70% of the champions who responded to that survey are using, whether it's SOLIDWORKS PDM or some sort of PLM solution, which is higher than the standard user base, which I think you guys might expect.
Oh, yeah.
You have your fast adopters, right? But this idea that there isn't really a wrong choice, I think is important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's great. I mean, all the learnings Steve and I suffered through for PDM Pro have come to the 3D Experience platform too, as far as the user interface and the experience for the SOLIDWORKS users right inside of SOLIDWORKS. It's very similar, right? I mean, it is a SOLIDWORKS product ultimately. It's coming from us, and you have choices and options, but yet a very similar experience, right? That translates.
And Sean, I'm going to plug this just because I've spent the last couple of weeks working on it. We've got a lot of great what's new content coming for PDM 2023. So stay tuned to that, because there's some good stuff coming here very shortly. It's a fun season to be in right now. And
when our users, along those lines, I mean, so PDM Pro, 3D Experience, but when users make revisions, right, and they're working with their SOLIDWORKS data and other types of files, it's not just parts, assemblies, and drawings. There's having a system that understands those inherent relationships. I know you've already mentioned that it can get very complex with the relationships. So having something engineering aware or SOLIDWORKS aware is very important, right? Which is another trend I know that we've talked about.
I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, let's dig right into that. So trend number 2 is this idea of engineering aware document management. And we've talked a lot about references, especially in the context of revisions and managing those. But when you take a tool like Windows or you grab an off-the-shelf cloud document management, document tool, sharing tool, it's one thing to manage files. It's another thing to understand the references in SOLIDWORKS files. But then you go a little bit deeper, and it's like, well, does it understand the custom properties and the metadata? And then you start thinking, you expand that a little bit. You're like, well, does it understand the templates, that I'm using to create this content? And does it understand my design libraries? Like, there's this whole kind of ecosystem of things that transpire with engineering data that, a system really needs to understand. And I think, one of the interesting insights was when you start thinking about a PDM system, I think it was something like 38% of our champions said that being more organized with this content was one of the best things that came out of choosing a data management system, which is interesting for a lot of reasons. But I think, again, just when we look at tools like the 3D Experience platform, we've got a tool that allows us to, if we take a look at this video, you'll see it's like right in the task pane, it understands all the relationships associated with my data. When I go to save it, I can structure it however I want. I pick a bookmark, what we call bookmarks. It's a lot of like a folder. You can save it, and then you're seeing that it's like understanding all of the custom properties. So it's extracting that, and it's allowing me to have basically a bidirectional way of engaging with that custom property data. So, having a tool that understands these relationships and helps me to be better organized. I think that's something that a lot of customers have appreciated and continue to look for when they're evaluating a solution.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when you look at those survey results, you talked about better organized kind of coming out on top. Definitely a kind of low-hanging fruit. And I think that's kind of a theme that we see with a lot of these first few trends, right? Like these are the top tier things that you need and you would hope for, right, out of any PDM or PLM system. But if you looked at some of the other choices, like the way I sort of thought about it, and with this survey, champions who participated were able to select multiple. But you look at some of the other choices, right? It's like there's money, there's time, there's morale. And if you get better organized, then those are in ways like cascading and like trickle down effects of the getting better organized, right? So it's almost like that first part. Yes, it is like the sort of dominating answer, right? Or was the dominating answer in our survey, but there was these sort of natural cascading effects that you can get from getting better organized.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I think that's actually something you'll see throughout this, is that there's almost a cascading effect in benefit as you start to adopt a data management solution. You'll see a lot of that kind of play out throughout this.
100%. We've talked a lot here already. This episode is still fairly young, right? We just got into it, but we've already talked a lot about how, like you were saying, Steve, engineering aware document management has changed really the businesses of many companies, not just like the design or engineering departments, the actual businesses, right? And including those who are lucky enough to have champions working at them. So Steve, are we ready to unveil a trend that I think actually stands to change the entire landscape, not just a sequence of businesses?
Yeah, that's quite a buildup. I hope I don't let
you got to nail this one.
I got to nail this one.
He teed it up.
Teed it up pretty well there, Sean. Yeah. So, this is an interesting one. This one is ease of use and security. And I like this one because when we look at the survey results, we actually tackled this from two different perspectives. One is just, I don't have a data management system, and what are some of the reasons why I don't? And, user training, finding time, adoption, that's 23% of the reasons why people didn't choose this. Another one is fear of storing their CAD data. And we'll maybe unpack that one a little bit more as I go along. But I think from the other perspective, we also asked existing users what was the hardest part, and it was like it was the implementation and the cost, and it was kind of almost validating the concerns from the other direction. And I think and getting user buy-in, that was almost 43%, both of those. And so this is an interesting one because of the fact that it's very clear from our customer base that they want an easy solution to adopt and to implement. If they're going to go down this road, that's very much what they want, but they don't want to sacrifice security, right? They want to make sure that wherever they're putting their data, it's secure, it's accessible, because it's your IP, right? I mean, it's extremely valuable to the company. So this is what, again, when we look at the solution, like the platform offers, it's the 3 experiences cloud-based, right? So, when we look at the kind of this infographic style, you'll see it's cloud-based, which means that there's little configuration, right? It's up and running very quickly, and it's accessible on any device. And at that point, I've got access to all of my data, parts, assemblies, drawings, tasks, communication, collaboration, all of that securely in one place. And what we're finding, a lot of customers are really, really intrigued by this offer because of the fact that they're not having to manage servers. They're not managing installations. They're not going through a lot of heavy customization. It's turn on, tweak a few things, and I'm off and running, which, to the idea of trickle down, ensures that users can start to get using it faster, that we see a return quicker, all of those things. So it's definitely an interesting trend. It's probably one of the bigger, more prominent ones that we're experiencing, both from our customers and from obviously the survey results.
For sure. And I think there's 2 things to get to. I guess there's one more here, right? There's another survey, I think that applies most aptly in this scenario. And this one, I remember in the background when we were reviewing these, right? It's in 2022, how important is it that any PDM or PLM system be cloud centric? Of participating champions, that's about 80%, right? that said it's at least somewhat important, with about 40% saying it's very important.
Yeah, it's very
yeah.
top of mind for our customers right now, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a question in the chat. I know, Lisa, you probably have tons of thoughts on this. There was a question in the chat on, just because you're very passionate about this topic, which I love. There's a question in the chat by user group leader, Steve Calvert. He asked, basically on the concept or the topic of bookmarks. We saw in one of the little vignettes using bookmarks. If I decide, essentially the question rephrases, do I have to keep bookmarks in the same bookmark sort of directory, or can I move them, or do I need to just have them in one bookmark? If I store a file in one, does it have to just stay in one? Can it be in multiple? It does. How is it kind of similar to and dissimilar to, say, like folders?
It's similar to folders in that you can move it. You don't have to keep it in that bookmark. And bookmarks are more of an organizational tool and very similar to folders in that way, but it's a totally different animal, if you will. It's a way of taking all this data and making sense of it, and something can belong to several different bookmarks. You know what I mean? I could put something in my bookmark and then Steve could have it in his, and it can exist in both places. It's not like a file folder in that it's restricted to only one location, right?
Yeah, actually, to that point, I mean, one of the things that I used to run into a lot with dealing with customers is oftentimes they wanted a folder or a grouping of files that represented exactly what they handed off to the customer in the build. And so in a Windows folder structure, you just end up with lots and lots of duplicates, right? The same bracket, the same bearing just ended up in hundreds of folders because they needed a grouping of what was actually delivered to their customer. And the cool thing about bookmarks is, like, you can literally have that same bearing exist in multiple bookmarks, but you haven't duplicated anything. You've just collected the data as it needs to be represented in this scenario from a handoff standpoint. So
exactly, yeah. I'd say they're more flexible, definitely. Yeah.
100%. Thanks for the question, Stephen. And just as a reminder, again, I'm kind of, if you catch me on frame looking down, I'm looking down at my phone, not to text my friends. Well, I guess in a way I am, but to see if you guys have asked questions. So again, feel free to ask questions. We are monitoring all platforms, and we'd be happy to answer them. So thanks again, Steve.
Yeah. So here's I guess another thing, Lisa. We've talked a lot about the cloud and managing the references and managing revisions. And I would argue that those are kind of the fundamentals, the table stakes, if you will, for a good data management solution. Do you find that oftentimes customers want to do more with, or have you found that customers want to do more with the data once it is being managed?
Oh yeah, I think there's an expression, give them an inch. No, just kidding.
I think there might be an expression.
There might be an expression. So yeah, that does work. So our next trend is about increasing the automation around this. So and again, this is Steve, I know you have a passion for process, right? Because it's about automating some of these processes. I mean, if I had to do, the same thing manually over and over again, it gets to a point where it's not effective for me or my company, right? So the question that we had, we asked, how important, what were the biggest reasons why the people that were using a PDM or PLM adopted it? And you can see that there's some obvious solutions that we talked about: organization, the file overwrite issue. but right up there is automation, right? Being able to do some process automation, and and that's a good number there, right? It's right up there with the other answers. So even though 60% of the champions that were surveyed do actually have a system, right? Only 20% of them are already doing automation. So what do we learn from that? Is that there's still a lot of improvement that can be made for getting those things that are less design centric and more bookkeeping-ish, and getting those more automated, right? So to that end, we can have, we see in this clip that we have the ability to do things like automate pulling numbers, pulling part numbers, filling in title blocks, generating PDFs. These kind of things should be in the background. They shouldn't be something that has to be something I do manually every single time. If, like I said, I would always say, whether PDM Pro or the platform, if you can say every time I blank, I need to blank. If it's something we can automate, it's something that the system should be able to do for you, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, nobody loves doing file save as PDF 150 times
Or
to
even
create
gathering
drawings.
screenshots. I mean, somebody says, can
Yeah,
you get me a good screenshot of that? Whatever, it
yeah.
just makes you stop doing what you're doing and do something else for a minute. And it just kind of kills your mojo when you're in the middle of innovating, right?
Yeah, or you think
Yeah.
about how many times customers how many times I've heard this story of, we've got this massive Excel book that we go and reserve a part number from,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
That used to be a manual book when I was doing equipment development. You reserve the numbers by marking with a pencil.
It makes me so nervous, like just that it's a file. Like there's so much going on there that would make me very, very, very nervous.
Oh, yes, it should.
And I think, like, we kind of joked around at the beginning of the episode that this topic, people can beat up on PDM and PLM. They can say, oh, it's a boring topic, and again, when you relate it to design and all the creativity and everything like that, but really, and you do such a great job of this, Lisa, of reminding people it's about freeing up time to do those sorts of things. Like,
Oh, yeah.
nobody likes opening up SOLIDWORKS just to get a screenshot or to
Yeah.
give an export of a bill of materials or whatever. So if you make that information a lot more accessible, that's a huge thing. But furthermore, like we're saying, right, it's like, if you make it so that there's a system doing it and there's no interaction required, then that's best for everyone, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that does brings in our next topic, because again, it's the ease of access to the information, right? So, beyond engineering design, and this is one of my things. Like you said, everybody's like, it's about the CAD people, and we're very,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a group of people who are very into what we do. I get it, but it's in the context of developing product, right? And what if, and like you said, I beat on this all the time.
Mhm.
What if, people could get access to that glorious data that our SOLIDWORKS users make without having to bother the SOLIDWORKS user themselves, right? And in a way that they can't mess with the file and ruin anything you did.
Right.
Would be step two. Like, I guess we covered that with security. But so in our survey question, so we asked there was a couple questions that struck us on this particular topic, because it's not just about the CAD users too. It goes beyond the CAD users. But we did ask a survey question about how often. You can see here that maybe 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen this, that people need to regularly access their data when they're off-site.
Yeah.
And I know we always had that concept of the home use licenses and things like that, but people being able to do at least regularly once a week, it's pretty obvious. But then if you change it to, would it be helpful for you as a designer? That's another survey question. It jumps to like 70%. That's a big that's a trend.
Yeah.
I know they're all trends, but that's a big one, right? But it is, increasingly necessary. I mean, look at the lockdown. A lot of people actually adopted the platform because all their engineers went home, and had to work from home, and it was an easy way to do that. But, we have, the ability to give people access, not just engineering, and we do need to get beyond engineering to not, make that engineering data available to people to consume it without having to be a SOLIDWORKS user per se, right? And so when we look at some of the examples that we have there, clips that, they're built so that anybody, not just design engineering, with the right permissions and access control, right, should be able to search, find, and consume that product data and do it from their tool of choice. I know we say every device, anywhere, anytime, but tablets, phones, Macs, things that typically non-engineering folks use, right? So, people can see what's going on. They don't have to ask. They can see the component. They can see how far you are. They can see where it is in the process, right? And they can also, but in addition to seeing, they can provide information that's pertinent to them, right? So they can put, like we're talking about that back and forth of properties that Steve mentioned. If you have somebody who's in charge of purchasing and who knows who we buy from, why would you have to go all the way back to the person who designed it, the CAD person, to put in, who we bought it from? You put it here and then it flows through, which kind of goes back to our other trend of process automation. Let the information flow through from non-CAD users into the CAD data and the engineering, generally fleshing out all of that engineering data, right?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting too. Like you mentioned, Lisa, SOLIDWORKS users, we've known of this term, these HULs, home use licenses, for years. It sounds silly to say. I think if you were to explain that to, say, someone who's fresh out of school or unfamiliar with the way that software has worked for years, it's like, well, yeah, like I should be able to use this and access this anywhere, right? Like that's well, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a trip down memory
lane.
No,
not without your dongle. Can you imagine if you told somebody, oh no, you can't access your data without that or the software without that piece of hardware hanging on. So yeah, things change, people. It's a new day.
Lisa, did your CAD system have a dongle?
Sometimes they did. It was so funny because sometimes you work with somebody who's never heard this expression and they're like, what is that? It was like,
they think it's new technology. It's like an invention.
Before license files, you used to actually have to have it. It's so hard.
So crazy.
Now I'm aging myself. Sorry.
So, Lisa, this next piece of survey feedback, I gotta admit, wasn't necessarily a surprise to me, and yet at the same time, I am still kind of amazed, how disconnected communication is around design, around engineering content.
Oh yeah. We had the next trend is obviously that we're going to talk about is this connected communication. So and lossless connected communication. So when we asked our surveys and captured some feedback from them, so we asked, how do you capture feedback on design reviews? So these design reviews, I mean, they used to be sitting around a table with a printout, right? But now today, so we asked, and I guess it probably still is based on lots of notes.
Yeah.
27%. But I mean, red lines, whiteboard email. So when we surveyed these champions, which again are, these users, the super users, if you want to call them that, I'm sure everybody's super that's using SOLIDWORKS, but they're more vested because they're champions. They're still using disparate mechanisms for communication and feedback, which I know is something that we hear a lot, right, Steve? I mean, we hear a lot from people that they need that connected way of getting feedback from people. And so it's all in one place, right? So, at tools today, there's a lot of collaboration tools, but they're not necessarily built for engineering data or support 3D data, which I know some of us have been working in 3D for years, but if you're designing something that exists in 3 dimensions, wouldn't you want people's feedback to also be in those 3 dimensions? Just asking for a friend. But but if we look at this clip, we need to get beyond disconnected things like emails, phone calls, right? It's easier. It's better to be able to comment right on the data with an call somebody out, like we're tagging somebody directly on the issue or the model in question, and get rid of these email threads, lost history attachments. And people talk all the time about it getting lost, right? That I email it to somebody, now it's left the system. You don't know what happened to that file once it left the system. You don't have any of that security, and you want to bring people to the data, right? And sure, we all still want to be able to share the screen and do some, sharing. We can do all of that with these tools, especially when they're cloud-based. We have an example of one of our, at World, we had a customer, and it didn't enter his mind till one day, this any device, anywhere, anytime, till he was in a room, at a conference room, and didn't have his computer with SOLIDWORKS there, but wanted to show them something. And he just was like, oh, they have a browser. If there's a computer, there's always a computer in these conference rooms. He fired up the browser, he logged in, and he was able to use the actual SOLIDWORKS without having SOLIDWORKS to have that feedback and that conversation. Yeah.
I think what stands out to me about this too is in so many other areas of our lives, we've gotten very comfortable with the convenience of being able to mention somebody or engage in conversation on social platforms that normally would have felt very otherwise disconnected.
Yep.
And what what we see now is we can actually bring that to the world of engineering, of data, and
Exactly.
that kind of environment. So I think it's exciting to see. I love it.
Yes, and I want to give a shout out to everybody that we've ever sold PDM Pro to. Said, is there a web client for that?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
this is a web client.
a very common question. I know all three of us have worked with tons of customers. I'm sure some of you even watching now like may have worked with us either at SolidWorks or in prior roles. You know, doing implementations for PDM Pro, which again is a great tool for given circumstance, right? But that was a very common question, even on days when I would be logging into tech support. You know, if it wasn't like a, you know, implementation directly, it would be like, hey, can I just use this on a browser?
Yeah.
I'd say, well, yes.
Hello.
The
The 3D Sketch platform is here, right?
Yeah. And it's some of these questions, back in like 2015, 2016, like you said, Lisa, less common.
Yeah.
But still they would come up. One thing I wanted to bring up about that survey, you guys have probably noticed that there is an other category. So other is kind of a bucket, but it was a fill-in field. Another interesting response we got from one champion was that for design reviews, essentially they would have these meetings. Their company, they would have these meetings, and then essentially they would chronicle all of the design review feedback into an Excel sheet. So that was kind of that was kind of the system of doing it, which again, it's interesting because like, hey, I don't know if it's working, if you're happy, great. But as we'll get into later with another survey question, you know, it's not always the case that it is working entirely functionally. So it's interesting that we're all kind of converging, even though we're doing different things, emails, whiteboards, maybe a combination of those, you know, red line markups.
Yeah.
You know, we're all kind of converging at a similar kind of point in time.
Yeah, and you know, these communication methods that revolve around the engineering data can take many forms, right? So it's not like you said, it's the feedback's many different things. So it's whether identifying an issue or a problem, or even commenting, like we saw in the video clip, commenting on a document or part of a drawing. You know, having a connected solution gives you lots of options and different ways to communicate, right?
It does, and I think largely what we're getting at, you know, especially with this next trend, which we've titled digital storable markup, is just that, right? We're talking about, we have a lot of disparate ways of doing things, but we have new connected technology, and we can take advantage of that technology. You know, so as we discussed in the last section with Lisa, you know, how we go about communicating with our colleagues. You know, Steve mentioned it, right? We expect to mention people and have things be tracked. It can definitely stand to evolve, right? In a way that more sensibly fits the way that, to our previous survey questions, many of us need to work and would like to work today or someday. And, you know, another interesting question that we asked survey champions on this note is how they and their colleagues request changes today. And here were the results. So, you know, we have email, you know, kind of as the dominant force here, almost 40%. Filling out forms, you know, whether that's printed out forms or it's, you know, it's a PDF, came in at 16%, phone calls at 18%. This is especially interesting to me, you know, with PDM or PLM functionality at 20%. You know, so you compare that, I think, to, and again, these are our best and brightest, and this is where we are today, all right, as an industry. But when you look at where this puts us, I think it's pretty interesting, right? Because even though we have, you know, 60 to 70% of our champions using some sort of PDM or PLM functionality, it isn't necessarily the case that we're using the change requests tools, if we do have them in our PLM tool set, to do them today. We're still potentially using these sort of more disparate mechanisms like an email note, which really connects to almost nothing. You know, filling out forms, phone calls, which may be the worst of all. And, you know, when we think about design reviews, change requests, like it's very possible as well that you think about it, like there are non-designers, non-engineers that are involved with both of these processes. And, you know, we think about 3D design, it's almost ingrained in us, a lot of us anyway, that there are those who have 3D design tools and 3D markup tools, and there are those who don't. Those who do are primarily designers and engineers, but that's not, it's not necessarily the case here, right? So the most natural language for feedback on 3D design and changes, I think, would be 3D, right? Let's keep the markup, keep all that in 3D, and with us still tending to work in these 2D mediums, I think we can stand to evolve. And if we show the clip here for an example of how we can accomplish these things using a modern PDM, PLM like 3D experience as an example, we can see, we should be able to embrace these sorts of realities. Namely, again, 3D is the way that we can, or the medium we can use to visualize and develop products. But for many years, again, the only people who had reasonable access to 3D tools were designers and engineers. Tools like these, they give you the ability to extend the benefits that we've had for years, right, to the rest of the organization in an easy, sort of tangible way, right? Digital markup in a browser, it's possible, and it allows for new ideas that we see here to be sketched directly on the model, not sketched on a screenshot or printout or anything like that. And if you need to use text, you can still do that to further convey intent. But this is, I have to say, as a SOLIDWORKS lover at heart, this is one of my favorite parts, that you can view that final markup, right? At the very end there, you could view that final markup and have it directly accessible. It just pops out from the task pane inside of SOLIDWORKS. So you can review, and if it makes sense, right, choose to implement that change directly within what is my native CAD tool of choice. So yeah, lots to unpack there, but it's obviously an exciting time.
Yeah, and it's also the important part too, I think, is it's the markup itself is its own thing. So you view the markup.
Yes.
Just like somebody's not mucking with your data. They're not in the SOLIDWORKS file messing with SOLIDWORKS things, right? And they don't need to have a SOLIDWORKS sheet to do it either, right?
So, and we've heard that for years, right? Not to interrupt, Lisa, but just a point of passion for mine, technical documentation. That was something that any of you in the chat using SOLIDWORKS Composer, we've heard that for years. Like, okay, well, we're not afraid to open up the SOLIDWORKS model and mess it up, even if we have SOLIDWORKS somehow. Yeah. That's a huge point.
Huge, yeah. But there's a whole lot of process that happens around the SOLIDWORKS data. Like you said, if we can bring it together and the people together using the same tools, I just think the communication will get that much easier, right?
The other thing I want to point out here is I think sometimes PDM, PLM can feel daunting. It's like, oh my goodness, if I don't do all of these things, am I really going to experience the benefit of all this? And I think, I think it's great to be aspirational. I think this is a place to get to, but in reality, you very well could just be a company that's like, listen, I just want to make sure my data is stored on the cloud and saved, without having to worry about it. And, this would be great to be able to go into a design review and be able to do a markup and then go back to SOLIDWORKS and see the markup. Right. And so I think I just want to encourage people that it's like, it doesn't have to be this massive aspirational goal. It literally can be like, listen, I just got a couple things that I'd really like to make just a little better, and life would be great. So.
Oh yeah, you don't have to eat the whole elephant all at once. You can one leg at a time.
Exactly.
Speaking of eating, checking in that poll that we did earlier, 70% said they would, around 70% at least, said that they would not like to eat if they had the choice at a 3-star restaurant. So there we go. We have our answer.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
So, listen, Sean, at this point, we've talked about creating a lot of different types of content and managing and a lot of different types of content. But maybe in the simplest terms, are there ways to manage the activities associated with design, right? I've just got an action I need somebody to perform. What are we seeing along these lines?
100%. And our next champion-driven trend, Stephen Lee says, is task tracking and management. Like you said, Steve, like we've talked a lot about, and we usually do on SOLIDWORKS Live, right? SOLIDWORKS is largely thought of as a design company, right? That's what we do. It's our bread and butter, but on this episode, right, even the exploration of design and engineering trends that we've already gotten through when it comes to our champions, right, our best and brightest, and how they see themselves working today, and not only needing, again, but wanting to work in the future. We've naturally arrived at this point of how do we, not only acknowledge but track and manage the circumstances, right, that drive for the product development process, and with how we work becoming more diversified. I think action and accountability, again, with us, like you said, Lisa, not us all not being in the same place and traveling more, and maybe working from home, or again being at different locations, different work sites. Action and accountability, I think, are increasingly important to systemize in those ways. So if we take a look at our clip here, in a system like 3D Experience, tasks, they're just called tasks because that's what they are. They're a convenient way of achieving both. And with any task, right, if you're assigning a task from A to B, B to U, right, it's like you need to know who the assignees are. You need to know descriptions. You should ideally know due dates. All of these things can be included in a web browser enabled interface right away. So whether you're inside or outside of SOLIDWORKS, it's easy to access task records and execute on your engineering activities. This is a huge trend, because we've talked so much about data and files and CAD, right? But the human stuff that drives that forward is just that. It's the human stuff, and we need to take care of that as well.
Oh yeah, who's working on it, right? Who's working on it? What state it's in? How far along they are, right? Who told them to work on it, right? So
yes,
so the task. I mean, so if I task Steve with something, I create the task, I make him the assignee, but then that's a big part of it, and then being able to see how all those tasks can roll together, and we can see them from a standpoint of everybody is into these Kanban type looking boards, which is what we have, the ability to see these tasks progressing through their life cycle, right? I'm working on this, and now I'm done with this, and people get notified, and then everything is in one place, as opposed to going over there. Oh, I've got a task to work on, and then going over here, working on the task, and going back over here, telling people where I am on the task. So definitely advantages to a single system for that.
Well, and not to mention, I don't know if everyone caught it, but the fact that I can just simply drag and drop the content associated with the action I need performed right onto the task. And now, the recipient opens the task, and the single source of information is attached to it. I can start, reviewing, executing on it, whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, and we have a lot of examples in that. If you look at the content of dragging for a SOLIDWORKS user to see the task assigned to them and take that SOLIDWORKS data. And again, it kind of goes full circle back to what we started. It's an engineering aware. So if I take an assembly and drag and drop it into my SOLIDWORKS session, I'm going to get everything that I need to do that task right in one place.
Yeah, and if you think about like each of the last few trends, we talked about how the ones that Steve went over, primarily the first few, right? Those are top tier data management trends. I think, Lisa, the ones that you went over are very much maximizing the benefits of having a PDM, PLM system beyond the stuff that you absolutely need and expect.
Yeah.
And I think what we're going over now is just sort of, what are the ways in today's and tomorrow's day and age that we can work better together. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. And with this next trend that certainly follows suit, where we're talking about here streamlining feedback capture. So a lot of what we've discussed so far, I think, has overlapped on a very common theme, holistically with all these trends. It's democratizing the ability for various teams to provide easily trackable, systemized product feedback in a way that is both efficient for the designer and the person providing the feedback. So we're not trying to make it so that, like you said, Lisa, earlier, like the designer has to leave SOLIDWORKS every time to get any piece of information, has to use an entirely new system that's not connected to anything. But also, so the person providing feedback finally has appropriate mechanisms to do that, so that it isn't lost, and we can provide feedback in the way that it was meant to. Or, we don't have to change mediums and do all this crazy disconnected stuff. But if we look, once again with our champions surveys, we saw a lot of disparate communication going on, like you said, right, in ways that were not easily trackable or standardized. And I think this is a trend that we're going to continue seeing, with systems like 3D Experience that are designed to, democratize the feedback loop and provide, again, designers that means of evaluating and implementing these different changes. And if we look at a clip here, we're seeing how 3D Experience can help companies using SOLIDWORKS using functionality called issues. So issues are a powerful tool for capturing and prioritizing and processing incoming requests. And it's interesting because feedback, we talked a lot about feedback capture, right? Feedback can be associated directly to the model data and also visualized for clarity with a simple drag and drop. And you can do this, you seeing a lot of drag and drop. Of course, we have drag and drop operations in SOLIDWORKS, but even if you're using a tablet, quick swipe. End of the day, you need to do, quick operation, quick drag and drop operation, you get it right in there. So really, whether it's 3D Experience or not, when we talk about more of the broader landscape of PDM, PLM, I think what we're seeing and hearing is that we need tools that naturally allow us in today's day and age to streamline this sort of capture better and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some knowns to processing the engineering process. I mean, kind of going back to the first topic, Steve, people don't just make a new revision for fun. They
right. Nope. I've met very few people who do that. I've met a few.
Not high on my fun list for sure.
No. But I mean, it's that, it's a part of a process, right? And so, that's my whole point is nobody comes in the morning and just says, gosh, darn it, I'm going to make revision B. Somebody's going to be like, why?
Well, but I do think a really important point about issues that become really intriguing is the fact that they become this mechanism that basically anyone can raise their hand and say, hey, I've got an idea, or I've got something that needs to be addressed.
Yep.
Now, the reality is not every idea is a good one, right? And so you kind of as a change builder or as an engineer, you get to decide which ones are the good ones and which ones do we, legitimately need to kind of push to the side. But, for the good ones, Sean, I think this actually leads really nicely into our last trend, which is the idea of, okay, great, it's a good idea, or it's a change that needs to be made. What do we do now? How do we facilitate it?
Right. The final trend in our top 10, improving change management. Like you said, Steve, it's a huge one. We discussed challenges that SOLIDWORKS champions have faced in their own companies, right? When it comes to requesting changes, managing design markups and a ton more here during this roughly an hour together we've had here. But inevitably, like you just said, Steve, these change requests have to be evaluated. For our final survey, just to get to that, how would you rate your change management process today? There's a lot that I want to say about this one, but just to go through it, 6% saying not at all effective, 24%, which was the majority here, saying 2-star experience, 3 stars at 22%, 4 stars, 12%, 0 champions saying 5 stars. I'll also say, for those of you who are mathematically inclined, which I think are probably most people here, it doesn't add up to 100. The reason is because there was another response, which was basically not any, which was a write-in response. And one person, I think, said somewhat facetiously, "What is a change management process?"
Sorry.
So that should tell us something. But yeah, so
this would be another restaurant you wouldn't want to eat in.
No. Yes. What is? Yeah, it's like what does it mean to cook meat beyond rare? I'm not trying. I don't want to eat there. But clearly, I think some of these results are pretty obvious. When you have 50%, again, you see the champions badge in the corner. 50% of our strongest community members marking their change management processes today as lackluster at best, and 0% saying that they would rate it as extremely effective. I think that very much does tell you something. And if we take a look at our final clip here, look, we all talk a lot about innovation, right? We hear it every year through the experience world, innovation, innovation, innovation. And innovation comes from ideas, but as we all know, and like you said, Steve, not every idea is a good idea. And furthermore, not every change request is actionable. It's something that seems like it's a good idea, but maybe I can't take action on it for one reason or another. And when it comes to a greater desire to automate, like we talked about earlier, to track and streamline, a modern PDM or PLM, like it has to have an ability to take the ideas that are good and the change requests that are actionable and sort these into actions, right? And using a tool like 3D Experience, right? You can transition issues directly to a change action with just a single click. You can add assignees. You can attach the impacted designs, so we're not confused about which one is the right one and which change we're supposed to make on which part, which assembly, which drawing. And starting revisions are automatically generated, right? We're not having to do that manually, which is again something we just talked about not wanting to do. And in the end, you have, and this is another important part, right? Because there's less confusion just on the human stuff. There's full traceability of everyone's approval, right? So this cuts down on unnecessary time loss, which I was talking, the product that I most keenly deal with today is Project Planner. And this is something in talking to champions a couple of months ago about Project Planner. They said like the one of the biggest pain points for me is just the unnecessary time loss that comes with having to do these like update meetings and the confusion over project status. Like that's just a huge thing. And when your team becomes more organized, which was of course an official original key aim by the champions when it came to the desire to get a PDM or PLM in the first place, that's huge, right? And it was also listed as a resultant benefit, just getting more organized. And this certainly helps us streamline all of that.
Yeah, I consider like the change action, like the one ring to rule them all. It's got the process automation, it's got all the interaction, it's got the players, the stakeholders, not to use those 25-cent words, but you know what I mean? It's
25-cent words.
It is a place, I know everybody's doing them, but as you can tell by certain, not everybody's doing them well. So this is a way to bring some known good practices, and you don't even have to invent the wheel yourself, right?
Well, and I think actually going back to many of the other things we've touched on, not only organization, but security, et cetera, another term that you'll probably hear a lot from us is this idea of governance. And it's a little bit abstract in when you hear it, but when you actually make the connection to a change action, like it's more than just a form that gets filled out with some attachments that get added. Within the system, it's actually governing who can work on the files and the design at that point because they've been assigned to it. So it's extremely powerful. It's simple in nature because, as Lisa just mentioned, it's a lot of the automation associated with a lot of what customers want to achieve is actually just built in to the change management. But it's also got the right things built in, right? When it comes to controlling access, getting the approvals, releasing the design, all of that kind of stuff.
So you don't have to do it manually. Like back to your beginning, like moving it from the folder in approval to release, and somebody says, no, it's not, and you move back.
Right. I mean, but who doesn't love the shell game? I mean, it's fascinating. Interesting.
I've heard it called that, but I love that.
Yeah, there's so many, and I want to give you guys, we just went over our 10th trend. So we're kind of at the end of this episode just about, and I'll give you both just some parting comments to make. But there's like you said, the shell game, which is so funny to think about, but sad because it's true, right? At many companies even still. And there are different artifacts, right, of a project or of a product that define who should have access to it and when and which type of access they should have, right? And you think about not just people, but groups at which phase, right? And those sorts of things get very complicated to do if you're just using like Windows folders and Active Directory stuff. It gets to be it's almost impossible to do well without tons of people pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
But
if it's one person they're pulling their hair out, it's not right.
Right. But it's been a joy. I hope let us know, of course, what you thought of these trends. Came from the best and brightest in our community. Thank you to all the champions who filled out this survey. Always love hearing from you. One of my favorite parts, of this role is being able to talk to champions about their thoughts and what they're seeing in industry. So thank you so much for participating. And also, Lisa and Steve, thank you so much for sharing your passion, your expertise for this topic. I know you're both very passionate and you're both experts in this field. Any parting words as you guys sign off here?
I'll just say I hope none of these probably are too much of a surprise for a lot of our audience. I mean, I think much of our audience, I think you probably feel this in some way or another almost every day. And the one thing I would leave you with is I hope you take away this idea that this is accessible. Like, this is something that is very achievable, especially with the platform, and that you should feel like, hey, if regardless of what end of the spectrum I'm on, I just want to store data in the cloud that I don't have to manage, that I don't have to worry about my servers. Or if you're, more advanced and you actually have formal change processes that you want to ensure people are adhering to, regardless of where you are, I hope you take away that this can be a very accessible way of hoping solving some of the pain points that we've kind of touched on today.
Yes, and I would say you kind of took my parting words, but I will forgive you for just saying our day has come. Right? I mean, I just see it as everybody works in systems now. You know what I mean? Everybody's used to systems taking care of certain things, like Google Photos, right? I don't put my photos in folders and then sweat how I'm going to find something, that if we're sitting together, when we see each other, Steve, I can pull up my phone and I can get you to the exact picture of my husband's fish that he caught. I searched by fish. I mean, everybody's world is changed. So why would anybody think that, the engineering world hasn't changed and is also moving toward that I can be at dinner with my family and bring up my CAD, the stuff I'm working on, if I should be showing that to people, right? What I'm working on, things like that. I mean, I just think it, from an overall trend, which I love this whole topic, by the way, that, Sean, but the overall trend is toward this systems to help us and not get in our way, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for jumping on. If you guys listening at home or at work, if you learned a single thing from either of these two, the best way you can thank them, just give a thumbs up wherever you are. But again, those of you who are still here with us, really appreciate it. I'm going to get into some outro slides. I won't make the two of you stick around for that. But once again, thank you guys for jumping on.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
For sure. So we have a lot to get to for the rest of the year. If you're looking for a preview of the upcoming live streams, I have that for you right here. Actually, tomorrow I will be back, and it'll be almost an entirely different topic. It'll be in the lane of automation. So there is some overlap, but those of you who've been using SOLIDWORKS for a number of years, you might have heard this term API. And I find myself having this conversation. I have found myself having this conversation over the course of many years at user group meetings and champions meetups, at World. What is the API? Should I care about it? Should I use it? And a lot of times it's coming from a designer. It's coming from an engineer, maybe someone who hasn't written code in years, maybe since college, or has never written any code. So when it comes to automation, is this the way to go? This is a little bit of what we're going to be exploring tomorrow. And I'll show you some API examples, but we will talk through those fundamental questions. Because again, live design in spirit is supposed to be that experience of walking up to someone's desk and just having that conversation. So we'll have it together. You guys can ask questions in the chat. We'll be back. It'll be tomorrow, Friday at 12 Eastern. And then if we take a look at our next stream that's coming up, Slug Me 7, the SOLIDWORKS largest user group meeting ever. It'll be packed with different bits of SOLIDWORKS education, meaning like SOLIDWORKS training. We'll have some cool stories from the community for a sequence of hours. And it'll be on Saturday, by the way. So it's not a usual stream day, but if you find it hard to catch up with our streams during the normal work week, this could be for you. So again, catch up with the user group crew. It's the biggest show of the year, the 7th straight year we're doing this. It'll be Saturday, September 10th. And then if you notice things around you are changing, maybe it's season, things are seasonally changing here. I know here in Pennsylvania, certainly it's getting a little bit cooler. It's probably because it's what's new season. It's launch season, one of my favorite times of year. So Thursday, September 29th, we'll have a bunch of our product experts on to tell you, just like Steve said, what's new with all of our different products, right? So you'll get what's new in 2023 with parts, assemblies, drawings, a little bit of visualize, all sorts of different products, and it'll coincide with the large release of all of our what's new videos. But you'll get it there first, Thursday, September 29th. And of course, look out for your local VAR or your local reseller partners launch events. Those are always a great time to not only get together with, really the voice of SOLIDWORKS and 3D Experience Works in your neighborhood, but to meet up with other friends in the industry. Man, this has been an action-packed episode. Thank you all so much. Again, be sure to subscribe, like the video if you appreciated it, and we'll see you next time. Take care.